something is happening in Russia. Something big, something dark, and something with the potential to define the outcome of the war with Ukraine, once and for all. It's been building up over time, slowly but surely growing in the shadows, now reaching a size and scope that can no longer be ignored. Even the Russian president, for all his bluster and propaganda, is utterly powerless to stop it. And it revolves around the one thing he seems to care about most: money. We're talking about the ongoing and increasingly dramatic economic collapse of Russia. Now, this is something that's been talked about since the very beginning of the war. Soon after the invasion, countries across the Western world began drawing up plans to impose major financial sanctions on Russia. Of course, some sanctions were already in place since the 2014 annexation of Crimea, but from 2022 onwards, these economic penalties really ramped up. Countless nations joined the cause. Enormous amounts of Russian assets were frozen, and major restrictions were imposed upon Russian banks and businesses. There have been multiple rounds of sanctions as the war has progressed, with many nations trying to decrease their reliance on Russian energy and cut ties with the Kremlin's economy in any way they can. Financial experts and analysts hope that this pressure would, in time, lead to an economic collapse across Russia, making it impossible for the country to continue its war. And there's no doubt that the sanctions have taken a serious toll. They've hammered the value of the Russian ruble and contributed to shortages of goods and price hikes for everyday essentials. Russian oligarchs have seen their vast fortunes diminish, and the average Russian has seen their life get worse. Western brands have packed up and left, while the cost of living just keeps climbing, year after year. However, the sanctions haven't exactly caused the complete, instantaneous breakdown of the Russian economy that some experts optimistically predicted. Why not? Because Russia found ways to work around them. In fact, it started putting plans in place over a decade ago, right around the time of the Crimea annexation. From 2014 onward, the Kremlin began identifying and reducing vulnerabilities in its economic system. It built up massive foreign exchange reserves, minimized its external debts, and gradually scaled down its reliance on Western technologies and financial systems. The goal was to ensure that even if the West did impose harsh sanctions one day, they wouldn't have such a devastating impact. Russia also reduced its dependence on imported goods by taking steps to strengthen its core domestic industries, like manufacturing and agriculture. It also began to pivot its trade relations, building stronger bonds with nations to the east and south. Countries like China and India have since become the two biggest buyers of the Kremlin's fossil fuels. Moscow also used other methods, like strict capital controls and increased government spending, to stabilize important industries. So, when the sanctions finally hit hard and Western nations suddenly slashed their spending on Russian resources, the country managed to avoid an instant, chaotic collapse. Its economy certainly contracted, and the value of the ruble fell sharply at first. But the Kremlin managed to stabilize the situation. This was heavily helped by China and India, as well as other nations like Turkey. Even the EU has continued to buy some Russian fuel, despite massively reducing its overall expenditure. Have Western sanctions against Russia failed? That's certainly what Vladimir Putin wants you to believe. On numerous occasions, he's boasted that the economic blitzkrieg against Russia was doomed from the beginning, and that his country's economy has proven much stronger than the West believed. He claims Russia has withstood the unprecedented external pressure, and that sanctions have actually hurt the West more. For a while, it seemed like he might be right. The Kremlin, a master of propaganda, plastered over the cracks with suspicious statistics and outright lies. To many, especially in major cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, life appeared to go on as normal. Russia continued to pour money into its military, sending waves of soldiers to the front lines and bombarding Ukrainian cities. They maintained high recruitment rates, luring men from poorer regions with promises of big cash incentives. This apparent stability was thanks to a plan Putin put in place years before the invasion. He'd built up a massive war chest, established new trading partners, and created support systems to prop up the economy. It was all designed to absorb the shock of any sanctions and save face on the world stage. But there was one fatal flaw in Putin's master plan. He never predicted the war would last this long. His special military operation was supposed to be a lightning-fast victory, over in a matter of days or weeks. He expected to install a puppet government in Kiev, annex new territories, and suffer only minor economic setbacks. The remainder of his massive war chest could then be used for future ambitions, perhaps even threatening a NATO country, or be spent at home to boost his popularity. The plan was clever, but it all hinged on one thing: Ukraine surrendering. And as we all know, that's not what happened. The Ukrainian people showed incredible resilience. They dug in, they fought back with extraordinary courage, and they defended their homeland with a strength that shocked the world. Instead of a quick victory parade, Russia found itself locked in a brutal, grinding war of attrition. The conflict has now raged for years, and Russia seems no closer to victory than it was at the start. It's capturing land at a snail's pace, losing troops and equipment at a rate not seen since World War II. To sustain this costly war machine, the Kremlin has been forced to drain its once mighty war chest, spend, and spend some more just to keep the gears of war turning. Slowly but surely, all those carefully laid plans began to unravel. The financial reserves have been depleted, and the cracks in the Russian economy are becoming too big to hide. Putin now faces problems that even his propaganda can't fix. It's becoming crystal clear that to win this war, Russia would have to fight for many more years, maybe even decades. Some experts, like a former MI6 chief, estimate it could take a staggering 80 years for Russia to conquer Ukraine at its current rate of progress. But here's the reality check: Russia can't afford it. The truth is, Ukraine is getting stronger with continued Western support, while Russia is getting weaker. The idea of this war continuing for decades is pure fantasy for one simple reason: the money is running out. The evidence is mounting. Even within Russia, prominent figures are sounding the alarm. Alexander Shokin, the head of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, recently admitted that the economy is facing a huge challenge to cover the surging costs of defense and security. He described the situation not as a managed soft landing, but as something not very soft and not very managed. The facade is crumbling, and the true cost of Putin's war is finally being exposed. The economic reality is catching up with the Kremlin's rhetoric, and it's a reality that can no longer be ignored. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one. Did you know that Russia's economy is teetering on the edge of a cliff? At the start of 2025, officials in Moscow knew they needed at least 2% annual growth just to stay afloat. The reality? They'd be lucky to see even half of that. Compare that to the 4.3% growth they saw in 2024 and you start to see the picture. Alexander Shokin, a prominent Russian business leader, warned that this managed soft landing can't last long. They need a rebound, and they need it fast. But a rebound seems like a distant dream when you look at the full story. Inflation is soaring, and the spending power of ordinary Russians has plummeted. The cost of essential goods has nearly doubled since the war began. People are spending less on big-ticket items. Car sales, for instance, are predicted to drop by a staggering 24% this year. On top of that, the government's budget deficit is swelling, fast approaching 2.6%. For a country cut off from international loans and strangled by sanctions, a deficit like that is a five-alarm fire. And then there's the heart of the Russian economy, oil and gas. Tax revenues from this sector have been dropping by about 20% year after year. As if that wasn't bad enough, Ukraine has been systematically targeting Russia's energy infrastructure. Drones and missiles have relentlessly struck pipelines, refineries, and depots. We've all seen the images of massive fires and plumes of smoke. The result? Russia is facing an unprecedented fuel crisis. Gas stations are closing, prices are through the roof, and a huge chunk of their refining capacity is just gone. As long as the war rages, these attacks will continue, because Ukraine knows they're hitting Russia where it hurts most. So, what's the Kremlin's master plan to fix this? Well, it's a desperate scramble. They're printing money like there's no tomorrow and jacking up interest rates. This is crushing small businesses and making it impossible for average people to get loans. They've also slapped on strict controls, limiting how much money can be converted to other currencies or moved out of the country. It is a clear sign of just how frantic they are to keep the whole system from collapsing. But here's the thing. These are just band-aids on a gaping wound. They can't fix the fundamental problems. There's a massive labor shortage caused by horrific war casualties and the hundreds of thousands of people who've fled the country. Supply chains are a mess thanks to sanctions and a shrinking list of trading partners. And they're cut off from crucial technologies and resources. Any one of these issues would be a headache. Together, it's a perfect storm with no way out. And the Russian people are noticing. They're tired of it. A recent poll showed that 2/3 of citizens would rather see negotiations with Ukraine than continuing this war. Now, Putin has never seemed to care much about the average person's opinion. He sent countless men to their deaths without a second thought. But he cares deeply about one thing: power. And he knows that to keep his grip on power, he can't afford to lose the support of the people entirely. This is why we're seeing some surprising moves from the Kremlin. Putin is now talking about raising taxes on the rich, on luxury goods, and on stock dividends to fund the war. He's even trying to justify it by pointing to what the U.S. did during the Vietnam War. This tells us two critical things. First, they are truly desperate. The old methods of funding the war have failed. They can't just print money forever. They're even having to consider slashing defense spending. The second thing it tells us is that Putin, for now, plans to keep the war going. He's painted himself into a corner. He's promised victory and claimed Ukrainian land as Russian. Backing down now would be the biggest political humiliation of his life. Yet he must see what the rest of the world sees. This is a war he cannot win. It's a colossal drain that's weakening his economy, his popularity, and his standing on the world stage. And it's only getting worse. To keep finding new soldiers, they'll have to offer bigger and bigger bonuses. To keep producing weapons, they'll have to pour more and more money into the defense industry. These challenges are quickly shifting from difficult to impossible. Putin is trapped. No amount of propaganda can hide the truth. No amount of spending can undo the damage. The cracks in Russian society are widening, and he's run out of ways to paper over them. He has dug a hole so deep he can no longer see the light. It's only a matter of time before the darkness closes in. If you want to learn more about how Putin's plans have backfired, check out our video on how the war accidentally turned Ukraine into a military superpower. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on all the latest developments from this conflict. Thanks for watching.